Alright guys, welcome to the Utah Airguns workshop channel. Today I'm going to show you how to reseal or check for a leak on a gauge with the FX crown. So now that we've got the stock off of the rifle, there's a few things you're going to need. You will need a skinny 11mm wrench. You can see it's not very wide, and that is so you can fit between the block of the rifle and the gauge. There is a hex in there that you'll need to access. You'll also use some leak detect. We use Snoop from Swagelok. It works very well and easy to apply with the hose end on it. So you may hear a leak coming from your crown, or you may notice that you've been dropping a little bit of pressure overnight. And so I will simulate a small leak by loosening the gauge. So we can hear the leak, it's audible, I know something's going on. And I'm just not sure if it's the regulator, if it's the fill port, or if it's the gauge. So I will take my snoop, I'll snoop some around the fill port. Okay, that looks good. We'll put some on the regulator, that looks good, no leaks. And then we'll get to the gauge itself. At this point you can see it's spurting snoop out. So I know that there is something going on with this pressure gauge. So I will take the skinny wrench, 11mm, and I will tighten this front gauge until I don't hear any more hissing and the snoop stops flying around. If you go too tight, the gauge will not function properly. If you go too loose, there'll become a leak. So you need to find that happy medium. And now that I can't hear any leaks and I don't see any water movement, I'm gonna just squirt some more in there. And it looks like we have fixed the leak. So that's just one of the things that could be leaking on the crown, but it is the most common leak point. So it is good that we go over this so you can see it is a simple fix, especially after you get the stock off, it's really easy. What we can do next is look inside the gauge well. So at the bottom of the gauge well, there is an O-ring. And if tightening this gauge doesn't work and you still have a small leak, that will be the next thing you need to address. So let's degas the gun now so we can look into the bottom of that gauge well. Okay, so that has released pressure from the valve. I will then use the 11mm skinny wrench. Crack the gauge open. Remove the gauge gently. They are fairly fragile, so just be careful when you're doing this. Okay, so once you have the gauge removed and the bottle detached so there's no pressure in the gun, you will see that there is a small little, most factory guns have a Delrin puck actually that's there, but if we have to replace those, I will use what's called an X-ring. I cannot remember the exact size, but if you were to call into Utah Airguns and mention that you need an X-ring for your crown gauges, we will know exactly what you're talking about. And you will then have to remove that Delrin puck down there. Typically we use a torch, and that will kind of deform that Delrin puck and then use a brass pick to fish it out. It appears to be in good shape, so I'm not going to worry about it for this video. But it is a good thing to show you that it is there and what to look for if you were troubleshooting a problem like this. It is worth mentioning that the regulator gauge is the same process to resealing. So if you had leak issues in either of the gauges, what I just showed you for the pressure gauge is also the same technique to use for the regulator gauge. And once you've done that, let's put your gauge back on. You just want to get to finger tight, and then I'll usually go probably 30 degrees past finger tight. So if you looked at it like a clock, maybe 3 hours past finger tight. And then we will screw our bottle back on just to make sure that we have good, good seals. I don't hear anything, and we do have pressure. The gauge shows pressure, which means we didn't go too tight. And it's not too loose because I don't hear any air, and we will double check that with some more Snoop. We will start at the gauge. Oh, see, I couldn't hear it, but it is still leaking. So it shows we just need to go a little tighter than that. Check it again. and it has sealed now. So at this point, you would be good to put the gun into leak check. Basic leak check is where you use a piece of masking tape and you tape off the uphill side of the gauge, so the side of the needle that shows higher pressure, because guns never leak up in pressure, they leak down. So we're going to expose the bottom side of that needle, like so, and then you're good to put the stock of the rifle back on the gun. So that shows you how to reseal the gauges and what to look for if you suspect there is a leak in this area of the gun. We will have a lot of other tips and tricks on our Utah Airguns Workshop channel that will be linked in the description below. Thanks, guys.